I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
In Econ 101, we draw a graph to understand market. In the reality of 2025, Trumponomics move faster than the ink can dry. And if you aren't paying attention,
don't blink, you might miss it.
oh, don't panic. Today, I'm going to show you what Trump's tariffs mean for the trade between Taiwan and the United States. By the way, I'm Jin-Hua. You're now watching the first topic of my Econ 101 video presentation.
Let's get back to tariffs. A tariff is simply a tax on imports collected by customs. Economists generally dislike tariffs because they create debt-weight laws. And over the past half year, you've probably heard one adjective over your morning coffee: reciprocal. The main purpose of reciprocal tariffs is to address trade imbalances. Historically, in the aftermath of the Great Depression, the United States passed the Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act in 1934. This ended the era of protectionism and moved the country towards liberalization by reducing reciprocal tariffs as a first step. It also established the institutional framework for U.S. trade policy for the rest of the 20th century, paving the way for general agreement on tariffs and trade, and later the WTO. But in Trump's second term, he reversed this trend. Like this, and this. Well, hold on. Let's first give President Trump a chance to explain his decision.
In short, chronic trade deficits are no longer merely an economic problem. They're a national emergency that threatens our security and our very way of life. It's a very great threat to our country. And for these reasons, starting tomorrow, the United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations. It's been a long time since we even thought of that. We used to think about it a lot. We didn't think about it for many decades, and you see what's happened. For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating. And because we are being very kind, we're kind people.
As he just said, since the beginning of the second term this year, Trump has increased tariffs on U.S. imports from nearly all global partners, primarily invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. As time went on, different phases of this fair and reciprocal plan were introduced. However, in today's video, I'm not going to dive into every step, because honestly, we probably lose track on the negotiations. So let's narrow the scope down to Taiwan's case. As of August 7, 2025, the US imposed a 20% reciprocal tariff on Taiwan. Note that 20% is not the final tariff rate. Reciprocal tariffs are stacked on top of the existing most favored nation rates. Meanwhile, companies like TSMC, which have made major investments in the United States, receive exemptions, while many traditional industries, machinery, bicycle parts, and others fell victim to this restructured global trading system. From a competitive standpoint, this policy pushes many Taiwanese companies into hardship, as the 20% tariff is higher than what Japan and South Korea negotiated, 15%. Well, I agree the situation is a bit complicated. No pressure. Let's shift this messy reality back to the fundamental graphical analysis we learned in Econ 101. story begins with the concept of trade. Both import and export markets gain from trade. When Trump's reciprocal tariff hits, the world price rises and the trading volume shrinks. As you can see in all three panels of the trade model, the pre-tariff trade volume, represented by the blue rectangle, shrinks into the pink rectangle. In the United States market, the quantity demanded for imported goods falls as the world price rises from P to P plum. This gives more room for domestically produced goods to expand, which is the main purpose of a tariff. In addition, the US government collects tariff revenue, shown as the brown-colored rectangle. Regarding the net welfare effect, the total surplus decreases due to deadweight loss. Even though the government receives tariff revenue, consumer surplus shrinks, producer surplus increase. Crossing the Pacific Ocean, let's look at Taiwan. As the world price rises, the domestic price in Taiwan also increases. And the domestic equilibrium quantity falls. Both consumer surplus and producer surplus in the export market shrink. And therefore total surplus naturally declines. One more important point: Taiwanese firms do not benefit from the higher price abroad, because the price P plum is simply the original price plus the tariff. On top of reduced exports, negative consequences such as harm to export-focused industries, lower GDP, and possible increases in unemployment emerge, forcing the Taiwanese government to consider appropriate response strategies. Now, a critical question for policy. Why not a quota? Here you see the US import markets under both policies. Firstly, let's see the graph at the left-hand side. And we find the familiar shade box, which shows the funds the US government raises from tariffs. Now, move our attention to the right-hand side. We'll limit the quantity to the same level. The price there rises to P plum because supply is restricted. The difference is the government now gets zero revenue. Usually, the extra money, as known as the quota rent, goes to license holders. A country would prefer a quota over a tariff. A country would prefer a quota over a tariff when it needs an absolute break-proof limit on imports that foreign competitors cannot bypass through price cuts. Currency devaluation, or government subsidies. By creating a hard cap on quantity rather than just a cost penalty, quotas are often more effective at forcing foreign companies to reshore production, building factories inside the protected country to maintain their market access. Econ 101 tells us that tariffs are simply a tax on foreigners. However, Bloomberg points out the flaw in this logic. The effective tariff rate is lower than the headline number. Additionally, in reality, much of the added cost is absorbed by American manufacturers themselves. This brings us to Richard Baldwin's critique. He argues that these tariffs aren't designed to mathematically fix the economy. Instead, they are a form of emotional theater, created to validate the anger of the working class. But this narrative, one that paints the US trade deficit as a victim, misses something crucial. The fact that The US dollar serves as the global reserve currency, which makes which makes which makes persistent trade deficits both inevitable and in many ways advantageous. So why would Trump still make such a seemingly reckless decision despite the predictable consequences? According to financial analyst Jin-Hua, this is actually a fiscal strategy. He argues that Trump is attempting to swap income tax revenue for tariff revenue. He describes Trump's overall economic framework as the three low, one high strategy: low taxes, low interest rates, low regulation, and high tariffs. When we place reciprocal tariffs into the broader context, Trump's intentions become clearer. Despite the risks and losses, his objective is to remove the restraints on American entrepreneurs and address the long-term problems caused by decades of trade deficits, industrial hollowing out, and rising unemployment. Based on these expert perspectives, I infer that Make America Great Again doesn't simply refer to restoring American global dominance. It also refers to rebuilding a complete industrial supply chain inside the United States. That is deeper greatness being pursued.
In conclusion, the tax-free graph shows us the cost of tariffs, higher price, and deadly loss, but reality shows us the underlying strategy, using the cost to rewire the global supply chain. We are not witnessing a trade war, we are witnessing a global value chain war. This is Jin-Hua. Thanks for watching.